Part 4. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 31. Chapter 31. Another gift that has to be accepted. She took a deep breath to encourage herself. Isn't it just 10 meters away? Xiaoling, come on, walk over. After a long time of mental construction, Wei Shaiyan was extremely impatient. Are you going to get up? Hurry up, we have to compose new songs tomorrow. Pei Ziyan was still staring at her, the corners of his coat fluttering silently in the wind and snow. She saw that he remained motionless and could only comfort herself by thinking that there was no way he could recognize her with this unrecognizable skin. Then, he finally calmed down and walked slowly towards the car. Pass by. The bitter smell of smoke lingered on his body, even in such a heavy snowstorm. Within reach, he spoke in a low voice, "You." She staggered, her body shaking uncontrollably. At this moment, I had so many mixed feelings that I could hardly help but shed tears. However, in the end, he just quickened his pace and left as if running away. After getting into Wei Shaiyan's car, Xiaoling was in a daze. She buckled her seat belt several times with trembling hands before fastening it. He looked up and saw Pei Ziyan still standing silently holding the car door. The wind and snow were blowing on him, but he seemed not to notice it. Wei Shaiyan started the sports car. Driving far away, he suddenly asked, "Do you know Pei Ziyan?" Xiaoling did not make a sound. The heating in the carriage is as warm as spring, and the music is soft, echoing in the quiet space. Her cold and stiff body gradually regained its strength, and once she relaxed, she felt endlessly tired. Wei Shaiyan's clean and white hands were on the steering wheel, and she drove the car without looking away. The way he looked at you just now, it was as if you owed him hundreds of millions. She smiled bitterly, and finally had the strength to reply, "Do you think I can afford it?" He also laughed, "That's right. You only owe the company a few million, so you're so nervous. If you really owe Pei Ziyan hundreds of millions, you might as well just jump off the building." She would rather just owe Pei Ziyan several hundred million. That would be great, and one day she would be able to pay off her money and goods. But what does it matter now? Even death can't expel that man from her world. What should she do to completely let go? Wei Shaiyan made the music softer, but the words he asked were sharp, "Do you know him or not?" "Mr. Wei," she closed her eyes slightly and whispered, "Yasin Ling is just a young trainee of Tianyi. How can she know the emperor's high-ranking boss?" "I told you that you can call me away, but why don't you listen?" Wei Shaiyan complained. Seeing that she didn't respond, she added, "I think so, but the way he looks at you is not innocent." "Bosses are all perverts," she said coldly, "who knows what they are thinking?" Wei Shaiyan glanced at her keenly, "Has our boss offended you too?" "Sometimes, I have to say, this person's intuition is really frighteningly accurate." Xiaoling turned to look out the car window and said dully, "No. You can't tell him that Lilei wants to support her." "I can't help but have a headache. What kind of mess is all this?" When she thought about Lilei's words about waiting for her to change her mind, her mood suddenly became a little worse. In this life, she just wants to live an ordinary life. She doesn't want to have anything to do with these big shots, and she can't afford to serve them. In the following days, Xiaoling felt depressed and depressed. Wei Shaiyan's recording studio was so busy that Xiaoling was distracted and made several mistakes. He scolded her so much that she almost packed up and threw her back to the training camp. This day finally came to an end. She finished work early and walked alone on the street. The winter sun is clear, pedestrians are scattered, and the most popular songs of the season are heard in the small shops on the roadside. As she walked around the corner of the street, a magnificent Audi parked in front of her. Xiaoling looked up and saw a man getting out of the car. He was wearing a long black windbreaker and took off his sunglasses. He, an old acquaintance, Chu Chen. She stopped and looked at him quietly. He handed over a business card. Miss Ye, do you still remember me? I know, the Emperor's Chu Chen, I met him at the year-end ceremony, she said calmly, without taking his business card. He was not angry and retracted his hand naturally, as if the embarrassment just now had never happened. Looking down at her, his tone was businesslike. Shall we find a place to talk? The Emperor has prepared a small gift for you. It turns out that the bribe that Wei Yin extorted for her arrived. She turned around and looked around, then pointed to a roadside cafe. That's right there. Chu Chen nodded and went in with her. There were very few people in the coffee shop, so Xiaoling chose a seat by the window and sat down. A waiter came up and asked them what they wanted. Chu Chen ordered a Blue Mountain coffee, and Xiaoling said, "Warm water, thank you." Chu Chen looked at her carefully. "You look very much like an old friend I know," he said suddenly. Xiaoling was startled, but remained calm on the surface. "Oh. She is also like no one else. She likes the window seat in the coffee shop, and is used to drinking warm water." Chu Chen's tone was actually a bit nostalgic and sad. She sneered, "The great manager Daking Chu came to see me today for nostalgia." He seemed to be stung by her meanness. His face darkened. He looked at her for a few more seconds, and sneered, "Looking for nostalgia with you? Yes, Yingling, you think too highly of yourself. How can someone like you compare to her millionaires, 1%? It was definitely a sign of good manners on her part that she didn't splash him with water. In this life, she is more tolerant than before. If it were Xiaoling in her previous life, she would never give up until she was ruined by someone who had betrayed her and pushed her to a desperate situation. He was the one who betrayed her first. Now, what qualifications do he have to pretend to recall her? Xiaoling clenched the glass in her hand and then loosened it, suppressing her anger. "Let's get down to business." Chu Chen pushed over a piece of paper. "You have a sister named Ye Xingfei, right? She has been hospitalized. We have contacted your parents and transferred her to the best hospital in the city, the intensive care unit. All expenses will be borne by the Emperor." Bear. She was stunned and looked down at the paper he pushed over. It was a transfer notice with the names of the Ye family's parents signed in black and white. Xiaoling said, "No one told me." Chu Chen clasped his fingers. "I asked them not to say anything yet. I plan to give you a surprise today." Surprise? Scary enough. She knew Fifei's condition very well. The doctor said that she would probably not be able to wake up for the rest of her life, which meant that she would stay in the hospital in a vegetative state for the rest of her life. Fifei is still young, and there are still many decades to come, and all medical care expenses will be consumed for a long time. This is not a matter of a day or two, it is a bottomless pit. This matter is not only very costly, but also very troublesome and a constant trouble. How could the Emperor be so generous for hush money for a public relations event? Hide it from her and get everything done first. Xiaoling's first thought was to transfer Fifei back to the original hospital. Although the conditions were a little worse, she used the money she borrowed from Tianyi, so it was clean and safe. However, she and Fifei are half-sisters, and her stepmother does not like her and only loves her biological daughter Fifei. Now that her transfer to a luxury hospital was a fait accompli, even if Xiaoling wanted to transfer her back, her stepmother would definitely not agree. With a faint uneasiness rising in her heart, she took a sip of water and asked slowly, "Is this the only thing?" Chu Chen smiled, "You are very smart." As he spoke, he stretched out his hand to push something over, a beautifully packaged long box, which was worth a lot at first glance. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 32. Chapter 32 Crystal Rose. Xiaoling opened it, and on the luxurious black velvet substrate lay a Venus crystal rose. The charming and delicate petals are stretched out in layers, with excellent color and fine carving. Every section is perfect. The sunlight streaming in from the floor-to-ceiling glass window reflects on this elegant red rose, as if it has a radiant light flowing like water. It is so gorgeous and moving that it cannot be compared. This is given to you personally by Dongpei, Chu Chen said. She knows exactly what sending roses means. There was a sense of absurdity and emptiness in his heart. It had only been a few months since she was killed. Even before her body was cold, he was already eager to find a new lover? Oh, what does her devoted love for him these past 10 years count? And when Wang Jingguan was engaged to him, what was her pain, unwillingness, and noise? Without Wang Jingguan, there will always be Li Jingguan and Ye Jingguan. As long as Pei Ziyan is willing, there will never be a shortage of people around him. She is the only one who foolishly believes in the fairy tale of two people for the rest of their lives, unable to extricate themselves. The years are getting colder, and so are people's hearts. The bright red crystal rose lies quietly in the black velvet box, so gorgeous that it dazzles the eyes. Xiaoling reached out to close the lid and pushed it back to Chu Chen. "Mr. Chu, I'm sorry, I can't accept this gift." Chu Chen was not surprised. Is it because of Wei Shaiyin? Don't worry, this matter can be easily solved. She was slightly startled, looked up and saw the ambiguity in his eyes, and then realized that she had been misunderstood. Around the previous year-end ceremony, Wei Shaiyin took too much care of her, which caused others to have some inappropriate associations. Xiaoling's tone became colder. This matter has nothing to do with Wei Shaiyin. Not everyone is so dirty. You think this kind of thing is dirty? Chu Chen laughed. Miss Ye, no, little girl, you are so incredible to me. Are you only 16 years old this year, or 17? How much do you know about the dangers of this society? Let me tell you, being favored by Director Pei is a good thing that makes many people laugh out of their dreams. Do you understand? Of course she understands it, better than anyone else. How did that humble orphan become a big star that attracted worldwide attention? How did that little Xiaoling, who even looked at people's faces when she was eating a piece of candy, later be fawned over by all the stars? She remembered each item clearly. However, what she understands better is the price all this will cost. Looking directly into Chu Chen's eyes, Xiaoling said slowly, "Mr. Chu, don't waste your efforts anymore. I refuse this matter." Chu Chen's expression also cooled down and he looked at her for a long time. "Yes, Xingling, don't toast or drink as a penalty. He has many ways of manipulating people, which is why Pei Ziyan chose him to be Xiaoling's manager in the first place. No matter what kind of trouble he encounters, he can always solve it in various ways and make things go according to his wishes." In the past, Xiaoling admired his ability, but now she just feels uneasy. Unconsciously closing her fingers, she clenched the glass on the table. "Chu Chen, what do you want? Don't forget, the big boss of Tianyi is Li Lei, and you will not be allowed to be presumptuous." She looked stern, but subconsciously he brought up the man's name, hoping to scare Chu Chen across from him. However, even she herself had no hope. If Chu Chen could be scared away so easily, how could he reach his current status in the entertainment industry? Sure enough, Chu Chen just smiled. "Don't be stupid, Ye Xingling," he said. "If you really belong to Wei Shaiyin, Li Lei might take action, just for the sake of his favorite general. But you said it yourself, it has nothing to do with Wei Shaiyin, so why does Boss Li help you? Even if he is rich and powerful, he will not have time to interfere with the personal affairs of a young trainee, right?" She really wanted to tell Chu Chen that Li Lei was already free enough to try to protect her, so why didn't he come to take care of this matter? But she was disheartened to find that Chu Chen was right. Why did Boss Li help her? She hasn't agreed to his request for support yet. If she really asks for help with a shy face, she won't be humiliating herself. However, thinking about it, she couldn't give in on this matter. "Agent Chu," Xiaoling looked at him and said, No matter how many times you ask me, the answer is the same, I refuse. Chu Chen no longer advised him. He took out the money to pay for the bill, slapped it on the table, and stood up. Take care of yourself, Ye Xingling. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the sunlight gradually fell silent. She watched his back go away, sat in the cafe, drank the already cold water slowly and quietly, and left without touching the crystal rose he left on the table. Back at the training camp, the next day was an ordinary day. She got up, washed up, changed into clean dance clothes, and went to train as usual. In the dance practice room, there were familiar scenes, the coaches who taught strictly, the trainees who sweated profusely and gritted their teeth and worked hard. Everything was so beautiful and simple. Suddenly, she felt that the previous encounters with Pei Xian and Chu Chen were just the same. Field illusion. At the end of the day's training, she returned to the dormitory. Pushing the door open, I saw something on the bed. It was an exquisitely crafted long box, half open, revealing the black velvet backing inside, and a Venus crystal rose that was bright red and glowing. She looked at it and felt a sudden chill in her body. Roommate Lan Lan walked in from behind her, wrapped in a bath towel, and used the towel to wipe the water droplets dripping from her hair. Xingling, why don't you go take a shower? Seeing that she didn't move, he followed her gaze to look at the place. A rose, are you looking at this? I don't know which of your mysterious admirers sent it to me. I have been in the dormitory all day today, but I just went out for a meal at noon, and it lay on your bed inexplicably. Lan Lan looking at the crystal rose, there was a hint of envy in his eyes. The other two roommates also squeezed over. Yes, we also asked the dormitory and people in several dormitories around, and they all said that they didn't see anyone coming in. It's really strange. That rose quietly exudes cold, inorganic light. Several roommates were still sighing, what a beautiful rose. This kind of crystal looks very expensive at first glance. I don't know who has so much money that they have no place to spend it. They are really willing to spend a lot of money, they don't even leave a name. Xiaoling had no time to pay attention to them. She just stared at the rose without saying a word, as if staring at some terrible monster. When she left the coffee shop yesterday, she clearly abandoned it on the table. Why did it appear silently on her bed today? This is Tianyi. Although it is only a small training camp, there are also a lot of security guards. Chu Chen, no, it should be Pei Xian. As long as he wants to do something here, it is like entering a deserted land. At this moment, Xiaoling understood one thing deeply. Pei Xian would never give up easily. This gorgeous but cold crystal rose was a declaration of determination and a silent warning. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 33. Chapter 33. The Hypocritical Ye Family Parents. Xiaoling's face turned slightly pale and she stepped forward to pick up the box containing the roses. At the surprised eyes of her roommates, she raised it with both hands and threw it to the ground hard. The fragile crystal made a crisp cracking sound, and pieces were scattered on the ground, full of bright fragments. Xingling, you. Lan Lan was so surprised that she couldn't speak. Xiaoling had no time to pay attention to her. She pursed her lips slightly and found a broom with an expressionless expression. She swept all the pieces together and put them into a vinyl plastic bag. Then he went out, walked 3 blocks, and dumped it in the largest, dirtiest trash can. It is quiet in the dead of night. She dragged her tired body back to the dormitory, covered herself with a quilt and slept. The nightmares continue. Boundless fog, deep in the fog is a huge cage. She didn't know when she walked into the cage. She only knew that when she was eagerly looking for an exit to leave, No matter which direction she ran, she would eventually be blocked by cold iron bars. What was behind her? Approaching, hidden in the fog, unable to see clearly. Woke up in a cold sweat. She sat on the bed with her hands and knees, not daring to close her eyes, and spent the whole night. In the early morning, Lan Lan looked at her as if she had seen a ghost. Xing Ling, did you go to rob a house last night, or were you broken in love? Why are you sitting on the bed not sleeping, and your face is so bad, and you have dark circles under your eyes? Xiaoling just pretended not to hear it, got up, washed up and went to train. I almost sprained my foot while dancing, and I went out of tune several times while singing. She called Wei Shaiyin and said that she would not go to his place for the time being. Wei Shaiyin sarcastically said on the phone, "Yes, it's time for you to reflect on yourself. The last song was really a disservice to me. That's all status, still want to make a debut?" She was in no mood to argue with him and said feebly, "That's okay, I'll hang up." Wei Shaiyin was silent for a moment. "Xiaoling, have you been worried recently? What trouble have you encountered?" She said, "No." Wei Shaiyin continued to lecture her, "There is no best. Remember to tell Tanying if something happens. You are a trainee. If you encounter trouble, it is his responsibility. Don't hide it and let him get paid for nothing." She said, "I know." Hang up the phone with a headache. How should she tell Tanying about this kind of thing? You can't say, "Mr. Tan, now the Emperor's Peidong wants to keep me, can you please come forward and help me kill him?" The key is that Tanying can't be killed yet. I continued to have nightmares night after night. As soon as I closed my eyes, the boundless fog surrounded me. She couldn't sleep well for many days and felt haggard. She waited in fear for Pei Xian and Chu Chen's next move, but they seemed to have evaporated out of thin air and made no further moves. Just like this, the spring festival has arrived, and the training camp has half a month off. The life of a trainee is actually very hard. There are no holidays throughout the year. I can only go home during the half-month holiday during the spring festival. Therefore, as soon as the holiday came, all the people in the training camp left. Lan Lan and her other two roommates set out on their way home as quickly as possible, leaving Xiaoling alone in the empty dormitory. Tanying asked her why she still didn't leave. Xiaoling was a little confused. There was a lot of information about her parents in the memory of the owner of the body, but they were completely unfamiliar to her, whether it was the name parents or the two living people. She didn't know how to face them. "Father made many calls to urge me." Tanying said, "Go back and have a look, Yexin Ling. Your family must miss you if you have been alone for so long. Going back to reunite with your family during the holidays is the responsibility of a child." Yeah, responsibility. Sit down and think about it. Since she has taken over Yezingling's body, she should take on the corresponding responsibilities. Forget it, go back and visit Yezingling's family, just to thank her for giving up this body. The Ye family is in the city. Xiaoling followed the memory of the original owner of the body and drove several times across most of the city before arriving at the door. It was her stepmother who opened the door, and her attitude towards her was cold and mean, but she felt relieved. After all, she really didn't know how to get along with her so-called parents, and she was too immune to cold looks and hostility. Force. Father Ye felt very guilty and looked at her with apologetic eyes. However, he just said, "Xing Ling, I know you have been wronged, but please give your Aunt Lu more time, okay? She has worked very hard for this family over the years. Not easy." Xiaoling nodded indifferently. But he was sneering in his heart. If I remember correctly, this Aunt Lu was clearly the mistress and forced her to take over the dove's nest. It's no wonder that the owner of her body refused to call her mom for so many years. All love is fake. What is true is that the human heart is changeable. Still not sleeping well at night, always having that nightmare. During the day, I saw Father Ye and Aunt Lu getting along, and I kept thinking of Pei Zion. The way he put on her coat, fed her, little bits and pieces of the past couldn't help but come to mind. The stepmother sneered at her, "Hey, big stars can't get used to living in the house of us ordinary people. Why do you look so depressed after just a few days back? If you don't like it, go back to the training camp as soon as possible to avoid the bad luck of staying at home." For the sake of Father Ye, she pretended not to hear it. Counting the days, Ye's father came to her and said, "Xin Ling, you haven't visited Fifa I after being back for so many days. How about our family going to the hospital to see her tomorrow?" Xiaoling has no objection. She is also very unfamiliar with this sister. In the memory, the owner of the body seems to like his sister Ye Xingfei very much. Ye Xingfei's smile is full of sunshine, as if it can drive away all the worries in the world. But that's not Xiaoling's feeling. All of Xiaoling's family affection had been exhausted by Xiaoyu in her previous life. In this life, she doesn't need any emotions. It's enough to fulfill her responsibilities to this nominal sister. Following Father Ye and Aunt Lu, we got on the bus and moved towards the hospital amid the crowd of passengers. This family is not wealthy, they are just ordinary working-class people. They have to be careful about everything they do, and choose the cheapest and most congested bus route. They spent 2 or 3 hours in the car. After getting off the bus, Xiaoling felt dizzy, even walking felt light. Step by step, she followed her father Ye and Aunt Lu onto the elevator of the hospital building and arrived at the VIP area on the top floor. Aunt Lu suddenly grabbed Father Ye and said, "Honey, I feel dizzy and nauseous. I must have gotten motion sickness when I was riding in the car. No, I'm about to vomit. Please accompany me to the bathroom quickly." Father Ye hurriedly supported her and looked at Xiaoling in embarrassment. After hesitating for a moment, he finally said, "Xin Ling, why don't you go to the ward yourself? It's not far away. Walk along the corridor to the very back, and it's 2206. It's easy to find." She said, "Okay. Turn around and go find the ward alone." As expected, it was easy to find. At the end of the corridor, there was a door with a natural wood texture. It was gorgeous and much better than the doors used in my parents' home. She looked up and glanced at the room number, 2206, yes. Hand out your hand to open the door and walk in. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 34. Chapter 34 Blank check. The ward is very empty, with fine-grained wooden floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and large areas of hazy sky. Opposite Ye Xingfei's hospital bed, there is a set of modular sofas, expensive leather texture, with a man sitting on it. He had a woolen coat casually draped over his hand, and was wearing a fitted black shirt and a silver-gray vest. He was quietly looking out the window and smoking a cigarette. Xiaoling's footsteps paused, and for a few seconds, her mind went blank. He turned around and looked at her calmly, as high as an emperor. She took a few steps back, turned around suddenly, and used her hand to pull the door of the ward. The heavy wooden door seemed to have roots in the ground. No matter how hard she pushed and pulled, it would not move at all. She banged her body a few times, and then heard Pei Zion's voice. "Don't waste your efforts, the door will be locked from the outside as soon as you come in." Xiaoling turned around in panic and met his dark eyes. Against the skylight, her expression could not be seen clearly. She involuntarily shrank her body back, pressing her back tightly against the smooth wooden door, almost merging herself into the door. "You are afraid of me?" He looked at her and asked slowly, "Why?" She was stiff and speechless. He slowly put out the cigarette in his hand in the ashtray. "Chu Chen sometimes acts a little rough. I'm sorry if I scared you. By the way, I haven't introduced myself yet. I am Pei Zion, Xiaoling tried hard to hide the tremor in her voice. Ask your people to open the door and let me out. So you know who I am, he said, smiling gently. Very few people dare to speak to me in this tone. I admire your courage. Actually, she had no courage at all. Her legs were so weak that she could hardly stand. She wished she could rush out the door immediately. Hiding her hands behind her back, she secretly tried to pull the door handle. However, no matter how hard she tried, the door remained as solid as a mountain. Xiaoling was so anxious that sweat appeared on her forehead. She was confused and worried about why the Ye family's parents hadn't come yet. It would be great if they could show up right away and open the door for her. Pei Xian seemed to have read through her thoughts. Give up, there's no use counting on your parents. I asked Chu Chen to contact them, so they brought you here today. She was stunned, her heart slowly sinking. It turned out that they worked together to deceive her. This trip was not to see Fei at all. In this life, she has been careful again and again, consciously alienating everyone around her. However, in the end, she was unable to guard against it, and she was completely betrayed by the people around her. What benefits did you give them? She asked with difficulty. Just a small amount of money is enough to make them burst into tears of gratitude. Pei Xian still smiled. Instead of caring about others, it's better to talk about our affairs. You can sit over here, I'm not used to talking with my head raised. He pointed to the couch opposite him. Xiaoling stood there and did not dare to move. She only said, there is nothing to talk about between us. He was not sullen. My patience is very limited. Yes, Ling. Should you come here by yourself, or should I help you? Xiaoling sensed the hidden danger in his voice. The more than 10 years of getting along with him made her deeply understand that the softer his voice and the gentler his posture were with the man in front of him, the more terrifying his methods of dealing with people were. At this moment, the fear sleeping deep in her soul overflowed boundlessly, as if she was under a spell. She instinctively moved her steps, and before she realized it, she had walked in front of him and sat down in the designated position obediently. He looked at her with satisfaction. That's so good. She woke up and was horrified by what had just happened. What kind of situation was this? Why, after experiencing life and death, she would still obey his words? Looking at him in panic, across a glass tea table, his face was clearer than in the wind and snow that night. He was handsome and majestic, like a god, just like the eternal father, mentor, and lover deep in her memory. Her heart hurt, and she looked away with difficulty. Pei Xian was also looking at her. Even if she turned her head sideways, she could feel the burning gaze, as if he was peeling off her clothes inch by inch, assessing her body and burning her soul. In front of him, she never seemed to be naked. Xiaoling frowned tightly and hid on the sofa in embarrassment. He smiled and said condescendingly, so far, you have made me very satisfied. As he said that, he took out something and threw it on the glass tea table. Maybe Chu Chen didn't make it clear to you. Follow me and you will get better results, much more than you can imagine. She looked down and saw a blank check on the table. As long as you nod your head, you can fill in the numbers here as you like. She just felt a little dazed, as if some history was repeating itself. That year, 12-year-old Xiaoling followed Pei Xian home in order to get money for her sister's medical treatment. Now, this man was spending money again, trying to get her to follow him. It's a pity that she is no longer the little Xiaoling she was back then, and she will never make such a mistake again. Her voice was dry. I don't need this kind of thing. Pei Xian spoke to her patiently. What do you need? Tell me. She bit her lip and said in her heart, Pei Xian, you can't afford it? So, choose silence. He lit another cigarette. It seems that Chu Chen is right, you are still a naive child. Slowly blowing out a white smoke ring, his eyes were far away. But you have to know, occasionally playing tricks, it's okay to show off your temper, but if you are too willful, you will always be punished. His voice gradually became lower, as if he was speaking to her or talking to himself. Xiaoling's eyes felt a little uncomfortable, probably from being smoked, so she closed them slightly. Scenes from the past appeared in front of my eyes, those terrible memories during the period of imprisonment. Unable to help but shudder, she mustered up the courage to speak. "Pei Dong," she begged in a low voice, "I'm just an insignificant person. I'm not worthy of your efforts. Let me go, okay? Yes, there are so many people waiting to be chosen by you. It's not your turn to comment on who I choose." "Yes, Ling," he interrupted her, his eyes clear again, "all you need to do is accept this check, or..." He looked at her coldly, "Maybe you would like to admire your sister's appearance after the infusion tube is removed." Once upon a time, everyone in the world said that he was cold and cruel, but she didn't take it seriously, because he was too good to her at that time and always showed his gentle side. But now, when she was no longer the Xiaoling held in someone's hand, and stood in front of him as a little person, she could deeply understand the indifference of the absolute power of being alone. In his eyes, crushing the Yes sisters to death is probably like crushing an ant to death. But Xiaoling couldn't retreat. The result of retreat could only be death, either Ye Xingfei's death or her death, rather than return to the days of being fed and manipulated by others in her previous life. She would rather die again. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 35. Chapter 35. Nowhere to escape. Xiaoling calmed down and said as calmly as possible, "Whatever you want, Director Pei." She said lightly, "Actually, according to my opinion, it would be better to pull out Fifei's foretube. Living like a zombie, unable to think, unable to be independent, it is better to die completely." At this point, she stopped and thought of herself in her previous life. To this day, I still have no regrets about that decision. After Pei Xian's fiancé died, he initially locked Xiaoling in a secret villa and sent bodyguards to guard her, but did nothing else. She clamored to leave and break up with him, quarreling hysterically again and again, and trying to escape again and again. Once, we almost succeeded. It was in the woods near the villa. She hid in it and was found by the search team he sent all over the mountains and plains. The search team drove a large group of mastiff dogs to surround her. She was helplessly leaning against a big tree, her face pale and trembling. Pei Xian walked slowly from outside the encirclement. His expression was cloudy and terrifying. He grabbed her long messy hair and dragged her to her knees. "Xiaoling," he said ferociously, "try to escape again, and I will let you know what life is worse than death." He dragged her like this, dragging her through the rugged mountain road, all the way back to the villa. The branches on the mountain scratched her light silk skirt, and her pale and delicate skin was scraped with blood stains. The blood stains were all the way. There was no end in sight. When he dragged her back to the bedroom, she was already dying, with not a single intact skin left on her body. It took the family doctor a whole day to completely pick out the debris embedded in her back. It took several more days and nights to clean, bandage, and apply medicine to her. Pei Xian stayed by her side and watched coldly, his eyes as cold as ice. Her body was in pain, and what was even more painful was her heart, which felt like it had been crushed into a ball by him, thrown to the ground and trampled on. However, she was too stupid and naive at that time, and underestimated his cruelty and terror. She fought with him desperately, resisted manically, smashed everything in the room, went on a hunger strike, and even self-mutilated. But he was unmoved and ordered someone to make a complete set of chains to lock her hands and feet. He also replaced all the items in the room with safe and harmless materials. She cursed him and provoked him, saying, "Pei Xian, I was really blind to be with you. I don't love you anymore. I have never loved you at all from the beginning to the end." He was so furious that he beat her until the corners of her mouth bled and her eyes were dizzy and her ears were ringing. When she still refused to speak, he tortured her until both of them were exhausted and she passed out in his arms. Day after day, his face became more and more gloomy, and she was furious, but she still kept saying that she no longer loved him. The more ferocious he became, the happier she became, and she didn't even care that the scars on her body were getting more and more. Until one day, he looked at her for a long time and touched her cheek with tenderness that he had not experienced in a long time, like touching a rare treasure. Xiaoling, he said softly, you will love me forever. The sun shone into his eyes, as if sinking into a bottomless abyss, unable to reflect even a ray of light. She was frightened by his appearance, and a terrible premonition arose in her heart. He tore off her clothes, tied her hands and feet tightly with black leather ropes, and wrapped her in a long windbreaker. Then, he carried her into the car and told the driver the name of a place she had never heard of. That is a remote and luxurious building. Surrounded by large expanses of lawns and woodlands, it was heavily guarded. Pei Xian's black Rolls-Royce drove past, and more than a dozen carved iron gates gradually opened. Behind each iron gate, there were several sentries with guns. Pei Xian took her in. A man who looked like a doctor appeared and guided Pei Xian to put her into the room she had reserved in advance. It will take about 20 days, the man said with some indifference. Mr. Pei, the expert team will submit a complete evaluation opinion to you. At that time, you can pick her up and leave. I want to see the whole process with my own eyes, Pei Xian said. The man's tone was very formulaic. If you insist, there is a special VIP suite in Area B with a dedicated video receiver to connect here, but I must warn you that the process will not be very pleasant. Xiaoling couldn't understand their conversation, and she only felt scared instinctively. Pei Xian, what are you going to do? She screamed angrily at him. Let me go, I want to leave. Pei Xian didn't look at her again, he just turned around and followed the man out of the room. In the following days, she was examined by a group of strange women. They wore white coats and thin rubber gloves. Under the 360-degree camera, they manipulated her with various instruments expressionlessly, recording a series of the data. Xiaoling was so ashamed and angry that she could not escape. Her hands and feet were still tied. They replaced the leather rope that Pei Xian tied to her body with metal shackles. The insides were lined with soft fur, which would not hurt. The technique was more professional, and the posture was more convenient for inspection and more embarrassing. She didn't know how she survived those days. After the physical examination, there were endless cross-examinations. All kinds of cold and merciless questions were overwhelming her. She was delirious, refused to answer, and scolded them and Pei Xian incoherently. The women in white coats remained expressionless, taking notes and exchanging words. Using technical terms she didn't understand. Finally, Pei Xian came to pick her up. That day, Xiaoling was chained to a bench, covered with a thin white blanket, and watched him walking step by step while dying. He took off his long windbreaker as he had come, and bent down to wrap her up carefully. Xiaoling, let's go home, he said softly, reaching out and touching the corners of her eyebrows, eyes and lips. Xiaoling used all her strength to bite his palm. The indifferent man who led them in looked at the scene quietly, and then said, Mr. Pei, you should believe the assessment results of our professional doctors. She is not suitable for this project, it is too dangerous. Pei Xian patiently took the injured palm out of Xiaoling's mouth, and gently wiped the blood on her lips. I only need to implement the plan and tools, and you will send them as soon as possible. The man was silent for a moment, and there was a trace of pity in his eyes when he looked at her. As you wish, Mr. Pei. Back to Pei Xian's villa, he locked her into a small space. His limbs, neck, and waist were firmly fixed to the ground, unable to move at all. There was a soft fur blanket spread under his body, and a small hollow silver ball was blocked in his mouth, making him unable to make any sound. Absolute silence, boundless darkness. Xiaoling panicked and listened to her heartbeat becoming more and more clear. Hallucinations gradually appeared in her mind. She had difficulty breathing and was almost going crazy. Just when he was about to collapse, a ray of light appeared in front of him, the closed door was pushed open, and Pei Xian's tall figure was like a god, walking in with a long whip in his hand. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 36. Chapter 36 Stockholm Syndrome. Xia Yu came to see her. She staggered out wearing a thin and wide long blouse. Her long hair was scattered and messy, and the plain white gauze held her thin body lightly, making her look haggard. But when Xia Yu looked at her like this, a trace of jealousy flashed in his eyes, and asked, "Sister, why does Brother Xian care so much about you and spend so much thought on you?" Xiaoling just looked at her coldly. "What are you doing here?" Xia Yu smiled, "Sister, let me tell you a story." She spoke slowly and eloquently. Hence, Xiaoling learned a new term, Stockholm Syndrome. "Sister," Xia Yu said, "this is the plan of Brother Xian and the doctors. You will suffer from Stockholm Syndrome under their conscious guidance and eventually reach the ideal state. No matter how Brother Xian treats you, love will well, no matter the torture, you will always be devoted to him. Even if he lets you go, you will take the initiative to return to him. You will lose yourself forever. Brother Xian doesn't love you at all he wants is an obedient toy." Xiaoling spent a long time digesting Xia Yu's words. She didn't believe it was true, but all of Pei Xian's actions during this period were so consistent with these words. At one time, Xiaoling thought that Pei Xian really loved her, as devotedly as she loved him. Even though she was imprisoned by him later, she still thought that he loved her, but maybe, it was not that deep and not that unshakable. However, now, Xiaoling discovered that perhaps, as Xia Yu said, Pei Xian didn't love her at all. From beginning to end, he only wanted a toy that he wanted. As for Xiaoling or something else, he didn't care. "Sister, think about it carefully." Xia Yu picked up the delicate handbag, stood up gracefully, and left. Xiaoling always thinks of what Xia Yu said that day. She found that she was becoming more and more dependent on Pei Xian. Although she was afraid of those terrible ravages, when he treated her like a gentle breeze, the gratitude and love that came from the depths of his soul were almost beyond the control of reason. She was afraid of herself like this. Looking at the thin man in the mirror, with his cautious expression, she couldn't recognize herself. Maybe one day, Pei Xian will succeed, and the real Xiaoling will be completely shattered and never come back, replaced by a docile and obedient walking corpse. She was afraid of living in such a humble way. It is better to die completely than to be unable to control oneself, unable to think, having one's soul strangled to death by life and death, and leaving one's body to be manipulated like a zombie, she murmured. When he came back to his senses, what came into view was still the ward, with a large hazy sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a sullen Pei Xian on the leather sofa. Xiaoling looked at him. "I am not threatened, Dongpei. If Fifei is still sober, she will agree with me." "Yes, Yingling, you are too presumptuous." Pei Xian's voice was low and mellow, with a hint of anger. Coercion. But Xiaoling was not so scared anymore. Having reached this point, she simply continued, "Please forgive me, I can't be anyone's." "Mr. Pei, please ask someone to open the door. I should leave." "Do you think you can get away?" He pressed a button casually. The heavy wooden door of the ward was opened silently, and two tall bodyguards walked in. Pei Xian stood up and walked out, saying, "Take her with you." Two bodyguards took the order, one on the left and one on the right, holding up Xiaoling, and followed him without any hesitation. Xiaoling originally thought that he wanted her just on a whim. Even if a little person like Ye Xingling rejected him, he would just send someone to give her a hard lesson and then throw her away completely. She was ready to bear his anger and revenge in the coming days, but she never expected that he would be so persistent that he would directly kidnap someone. Unspeakable fear surged in her heart, and those terrible past events came to mind. She never wanted to experience such a life as a pig or a dog again. Xiaoling struggled hard and shouted, "Pei Zion! Let them go! You are breaking the law!" He was unmoved at all and walked ahead on his own. Suddenly, he stopped. Xiaoling looked up and saw that the originally spacious corridor was completely blocked. Not far ahead, a group of tall men were pouring out of a ward. There were about 10 people, noisy, talking and laughing. Walked towards the elevator as if there was no one around, just blocking their way. Xiaoling recognized the leading man at a glance. He was wearing a set of white casual clothes. The soft and comfortable material faintly outlined the well-proportioned and strong muscle lines. His wheat-colored skin glowed with a healthy luster. His facial features were profound and handsome, and his deep eyes exuded a breathtaking look. He looks so perfect no matter where he is. Xiaoling felt so grateful to God that in desperation, she shouted out without hesitation, "Li Lei." End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 37. Chapter 37. Trainees have no personal matters. The dazzling man turned around, and so did the crowd surrounding him. Seeing Xiaoling being held hostage, Li Lei raised his eyebrows slightly and made a gesture. Following his gesture, the group of tall men stopped talking and laughing, and changed their positions at an extremely fast speed. The crowd that originally seemed scattered and could be easily passed through now became like an iron wall, faintly visible. There was a chilling air coming towards my face. Xiaoling's arms were held tighter by the 2 bodyguards. The scene was silent for a moment. After a moment, Li Lei laughed softly. "It turns out to be the Emperor's Pei Dong. Why are you arresting my Tianyi people?" Pei Zion looked solemn. "Li Lei, this is a private matter." Xiaoling's heart was in her throat, fearing that Li Lei would give up as soon as Pei Zion said these words. After all, she had no friendship with Big Boss Li not long ago. She refused to be his lover, thus causing him disgrace. He could just stand by and watch her being bullied, even make things worse and watch her laugh. But he just looked at Pei Zion. "Trainers of Tianyi have no personal matters." Xiaoling instantly breathed a sigh of relief. She felt that Big Boss Li was a very good person, and she obviously planned to intervene. Tianyi's trainees have no private affairs. This is irrefutable. Trainees are reserve artists, and for artists, private matters are public affairs. "Li Lei," Pei Zion said in a deep voice with a hint of amusement, "she is just a small character. It's hard for a big boss like you to recognize her as a trainee of your Tianyi." Li Lei looked innocent. "I am a good boss who cares about my employees." Changing the topic, he added, "Dr. Pei, please let go of Ye Xingling. This child is young and not sensible. If there is any offense, I will have someone discipline him and give you an explanation." Pei Zion looked at him deeply, with an unpredictable expression. Li Lei looked relaxed, with a smile even on his graceful lips, but the dozen or so men behind him were even more murderous, with a sense of real danger that made people breathless. Pei Zion only brought 2 bodyguards with him, and he had to take care of Xiaoling. Finally, Pei Zion gently raised his hand. The 2 bodyguards let go of Xiaoling at the same time. The moment she regained her freedom, Xiaoling was stunned for a moment, unable to believe that it could be so easy. Pei Zion also had a moment to compromise. But then, there was a vague emptiness in my heart. "What are you doing standing there stupidly? Come here," Li Lei's voice came. Xiaoling suddenly woke up and hurriedly ran towards him and stood behind him. The dozen or so burly men protected her in the middle as if they were protectors. When she calmed down for a moment, she felt cold sweat soaking her back. Pei Xian's eyes have been following her, like a shadow, like a thorn in the back. Li Lei remained calm and blocked her with his body. Li Lei, Pei Xian said slowly, you can protect her for a while, but you may not be able to protect her for the rest of your life. Then don't worry about it, Dongpei. Li Lei smiled nonchalantly. After finishing speaking, he waved his hand and led a group of people toward the elevator. When entering the elevator, Xiaoling couldn't help but turn around and take one last look at Pei Xian through the gap in the crowd. Pei Xian still stood there, his unfathomable gaze locked on her, like a blazing flame or an abyss. She avoided it in a panic and fled into the elevator in a hurry. The elevator door slowly closed, and the group of burly men suddenly exploded. Boss, isn't it? Just when you come out to visit a doctor, you can be a hero and save a beauty. This little beauty is from Tianyi training camp. Aren't you very good? Don't you mind the business over there? That's it, boss, please introduce the name of the little beauty to us. Little beauty, don't be afraid, there are brothers here, no bad people dare to bully you. They talked all over the place and turned into gossipy women and men one by one. Their previous image of tough guys was gone. Xiaoling had a splitting headache from the noise, and the remaining fear and pain in her heart were swept away by the noise. Who said that only women can make noise like ducks? This group of men can at least talk about hundreds of ducks. In the commotion, only Li Lei remained silent, leaning against the glass wall with his arms folded, smiling and letting them make trouble. She was protected by his side, within reach, hearing the subtle ups and downs of his breathing, and smelling the scent of sunshine and grass on his body, which made people relax and feel at ease. Not long after, the elevator arrived at the garage on the first floor, and with a ding sound, the door opened. A group of people came out and said goodbye to Li Lei one after another, and dispersed in twos and threes like a tide. In a blink of an eye, she and him were the only ones left. Xiaoling looked up at him. Under the dim light of the garage, his eyes were deep, his profile was deep and handsome, and he had one hand casually inserted in his pocket. He looked like a male fashion model that can be seen everywhere on street billboards, dazzling and shameless. Harmful. It was hard to imagine that such a person had just rescued her from Pei Xian. She said sincerely, "Thank you, boss." He half smiled, "Instead of thanking me, why don't you thank you for your luck? You dare to provoke Pei Xian, do you think you have a long life?" She was speechless. She couldn't tell him that it wasn't her who provoked Pei Xian, but Pei Xian who took the initiative to provoke a little person like her. If you say it, someone must believe it. After a moment of silence, she only said, "I was wrong." His handsome eyebrows furrowed and he looked at her. She didn't know what made him unhappy, so she looked at him innocently. "I don't like being treated perfunctorily," he said. "You are not a person who makes trouble easily. Why did you admit your mistake so quickly and don't want to tell me the real reason? How did you get into trouble with Pei Xian?" She was startled, surprised by his keen insight. Yes, she admitted her mistake so easily just to settle the matter. The love-hate past between her and Pei Xian was so tragic that even the slightest touch would be unbearable pain. She only wants to use the simplest words to guide people gently. But Li Lei didn't let her go and waited silently for her answer. She turned her head slightly, not looking into his eyes. "Pei Xian." It took a lot of effort for her to say the name that was turning over in her heart. "He is interested in me and wants to keep me. I don't know why he is interested in me." "I see." Li Lei's eyes deepened, and his long-term keen insight allowed him to conclude that her words were still not true. However, looking at her slightly clenched fists hanging by her sides, he smiled and changed the subject considerately. "Where do you live? I'll take you back." "Huh?" She was startled. She didn't expect Big Boss Li to be so kind. Don't bother me. I'll just go back by myself. You're going back by yourself, he sneered lazily. I don't mind, but I'm afraid you won't be able to walk more than 100 meters before being captured by Pei Xian's people. Xiaoling couldn't help but shuddered as she thought of the way Pei Xian looked at her before leaving. Then please, send me back to the training camp, she whispered. The Ye family can't go back. Since the so-called parents sold her once, they probably won't mind selling her a second time. She was unfamiliar with other places. After much deliberation, the only place she could find a place to stay was the training camp. Li Lei laughed again. Do you really think of me as a coolie? We are in the south of the city now, and the training camp is in the north. It doesn't matter if we go across the city. The problem is that there will be traffic jams at this time. Yes, Ling, don't bully the boss like this. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 38. Chapter 38. The Rules of Wealthy Families. Xiaoling was stunned and cursed. Now she remembered that she was the boss. Who had to give it to her just now? Weakly, she said, then tell me what to do. Li Lei turned the car keys in his hand, his beautiful eyes sparkling. Go to my apartment and spend the night together. I'll ask someone from the training camp to pick you up early tomorrow morning. His apartment? Unexpectedly, she remembered the last suggestion about keeping him and raised her eyebrows, and frowned. Li Lei seemed to see what she was thinking, and said, I told you, I'm not interested in forcing people. With your courage, how dare you provoke Pei Xian? Then he walked forward. Think it through, just follow me, or go back by yourself. Xiaoling looked at his back. Pei Xian's gloomy eyes reappeared in her heart. She weighed for a moment, gritted her teeth and followed him. Li Lei's car is a modified off-road vehicle. In her previous life, Xiaoling was also an experienced driver. She could tell at a glance that it was modified from a Land Rover military version. It had excellent performance, a tough and domineering appearance, and was very impressive on the road. Everyone in Tianyi seems to like driving by themselves, including Wei Shaiyan and Li Lei. Xiaoling got into the passenger seat and fastened her seat belt. Li Lei skillfully controlled the steering wheel and drove out of the garage and merged into the busy traffic on the highway. Half an hour later, the off-road vehicle drove into a high-end community that was quiet in the middle of the hustle and bustle. The large green belt was planted with various precious trees, the shade was lush and green, but the crowds were sparse and clean. Li Lei parked the car in the garage, took Xiaoling and went upstairs from the dedicated direct elevator. Entering the door, turning around the entrance hall, you will see a very spacious living room, which opens up about half a floor. The ceiling is 5 or 6 meters high from the ground. The entire wall is covered with floor-to-ceiling glass, which allows for transparent light and excellent views. On the fine-grained original wood floor, there is a complete set of modular leather sofas, the most popular design nowadays, with luxurious shapes and elegant lines. Li Lei casually threw his coat on the sofa and said to her, "Sit down." After finishing speaking, he turned around and didn't know what he was doing. Xiaoling looked at the sofa, then walked over to sit down. Suddenly she noticed that on the snow-white blanket spread nearby, there was a leopard lying lazily, covered with gorgeous rose markings, and its limbs stretched out. "Spread yourself into a leopard skin." She almost stepped on it. Can't help but take a step back and let out a low breath. The leopard, Mao, lazily raised his eyelids to look at her, then closed his eyes and continued to sleep. Xiaoling did not dare to make any more noise. She held her breath and carefully stepped back, then stepped back again, until she ran into a solid embrace. She was caught off guard and almost screamed again, but an arm wrapped around her waist, and from above her head, Li Lei's deep magnetic voice came, "Don't be afraid, it's me." She took a deep breath and relaxed. The heart that was half dead from being frightened slowly recovered. The first thought that came to mind was that she and this master, Yubeo, were absolutely at odds with each other. They must be incompatible with each other, so they were frightened every time they met, without exception. Breaking away from his arms, Xiaoling turned around and looked at him. I'm not going to sit on that sofa. Is there another room? He smiled, his deep eyes flashing. Aren't you going to have dinner? Ah. He turned around and said, come and help in the kitchen. Xiaoling was stunned and followed him into the spacious and bright kitchen, but was frightened again. In the kitchen, Big Boss Li was cooking in a white apron, with a pot in one hand and a spoon in the other, with a professional and skillful posture. Do you usually cook by yourself? She asked, stammering. This fright was definitely bigger than the leopard she almost stepped on just now. Really, he was a big boss, and he still had a good background. This hobby? Looking at his smooth posture, it is obviously not the first time. Li Lei turned a blind eye to her shock and casually threw a tomato over. Peel the skin off. Xiaoling subconsciously caught it and looked at the bright red tomato in her hand for a long time. Until he urged her, she woke up as if from a dream and started to peel it clumsily. Although she had lived 2 lifetimes and had never cooked before, she discovered how difficult it was to peel tomatoes. After struggling for a long time, her hands and body were covered with tomato juice, but she still couldn't peel them properly. Looking at the pitted tomato in her hand, she seriously doubted, could it be eaten? Give it to me after you've peeled it off. It's time to put it in the pot, Li Lei said. After waiting for a while, there was no movement. He turned around and saw Xiaoling's slender figure standing in front of the console, bewildered and grabbing a group of red objects that could no longer be identified. Even the boss was well informed. At this moment, he was also stunned. Ling, are you really a woman? Master boss, it's really not my fault, it's my first time, she said innocently, holding up the tomato. Li Lei almost wanted to sigh, so he snatched the unknown red object away with his hand, threw it in a parabola accurately, and threw it into the trash can nearby. Then, he resigned himself to taking out another one, started to do it himself, and relied on his own efforts. While peeling the tomatoes, he did not forget to call her, go and wash the lettuce in the sink. If it doesn't work well, go to the living room to accompany Mao. After thinking about it, I felt that I was too fierce, so I turned around and bared my teeth at her. Xiaoling was so frightened by his laughter that she went to the sink to wash the lettuce and gritted her teeth. Isn't it just a matter of raising a ferocious beast? What's so great about it? I've never seen such a fox pretending to be a tiger, oh no, a man pretending to be a leopard. Bastard, what a big bastard! It wasn't until the lettuce was torn to pieces that I realized something was wrong. Boss, that. Ling, go and accompany Mao. She swore that she would never come to Li Lei's apartment again. Finally having dinner, she had to admit that Big Boss Li's cooking skills were indeed good. Each dish was as delicious as a professional chef. No, it was even better than the food she had eaten by professional chefs in her 2 lifetimes combined. Boss, you really know everything, she praised sincerely. Li Lei narrowed his eyes and smiled. I've been out alone for a long time, and I'm more or less good at cooking. She nodded to express her understanding. It could be seen from the way he drove an off-road vehicle that he should be a very independent person and like to do everything by himself. Thinking about it this way, she suddenly felt that it wouldn't be too strange even if he didn't hire a servant. Can't help but wonder, what kind of family brought him up like this? And Pei Xian are completely 2 different people. Inadvertently, she thought of that man who was as dangerous as the abyss. He abided by the rules and etiquette of an ancient wealthy family, wore expensive silk shirts, woolen coats, and had a group of servants. He looked elegant and impeccable in his manners. With a mellow voice and a gentle tone, he told her calmly, I need a wife who is well matched and worthy of the role of the Pei family's mistress. Deep in my heart, a tingling pain spreads. It, Mom, the rules of a wealthy family. Xiaoling took a big bite of rice and held back the tears in her eyes. From an angle that she was unaware of, Li Lei looked at her thoughtfully, his eyes unpredictable. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 39. Chapter 39. I don't accept female guests here. After eating, Xiaoling volunteered to stay in the restaurant to help him clean up the mess, mainly because she didn't want to go back to the living room alone and face the leopard named Irma. Li Lei saw through her little thoughts at a glance. Don't cause trouble. You can go to the guest room to rest. Turn left and it's the second room. She entered the guest room as if she had received an amnesty. The guest room is neat and spacious, with soft and thick blankets on the floor, and a variety of famous wines displayed in the oak wine cabinet. Xiaoling opened the closet and saw many brand new and unopened clothes hanging inside. They were professionally cut and made of exquisite materials. They were all internationally renowned luxury brands. No ordinary person could afford any of them. She glanced over them briefly and saw that they were available in various sizes and styles, from nightgowns to coats, presumably for guests. The only drawback is that they are all men's clothing. Xiaoling frowned, a little unbelievable, isn't it? Boss Li looks handsome, wealthy, and romantic. Well, the fact that he is romantic can be seen from the fact that he tried to marry her. For a person like him, there are no women's clothes in the guest room. She suspected that she had entered the wrong room, so she turned around and went to find Boss Li. Boss, are there any women's clothes in your guest room? Li Lei was cleaning up the mess in the kitchen. He had a handsome face under the dim light, and his long and strong wheat-colored fingers were covered with snow-white dish soap foam, which shone with his movements. Hearing this, he turned to look at her and smiled. Women's clothing? I really forgot to prepare it. I usually don't entertain female guests here. Just wait a moment, I'll have someone bring it. She hurriedly said, no need, it's the same if you wear men's clothes. She knew that her current identity was just a young trainee at the bottom of the company. Thanks to the big boss for rescuing her and taking her in, it was just a matter of food and shelter. She shouldn't be there anymore. What are the requirements? Li Lei said, wait. There is no doubt about it. He wiped his hands on a clean white rag, took out his mobile phone, and dialed a number. Sutang, go buy some women's clothes and deliver them to me. Yes, I live in the south of the city. Suitable for 17-year-old girls, bathrobes and pajamas. Outerwear, all. Size, he looked at Xiaoling and casually gave out a series of numbers. Her height, measurements, and weight were exactly the same. Xiaoling. She still underestimated how charming Boss Li was. This skill of visually measuring a girl's body measurements could not be mastered by countless people. Not long after, the doorbell rang. Before Li Lei could open the door, the person outside had already opened the door and came in. He must be someone he knows very well and has the key. Xiaoling looked around and saw a graceful woman with a beautiful face and waist-length hair like gorgeous seaweed, scattered in strands under the soft crystal light. She wore a light purple mulberry silk embroidered long dress, a large tasseled shawl, a twisted silver bracelet, and a luxury shopping handbag. There was a faint fragrance lingering as she walked. She stopped in front of Li Lei. Young master. Li Lei asked, did you buy the things? The woman's voice was pleasant. I bought it, and it's all here. She handed over the valuable shopping bag in her hand. Li Lei took it and handed it to Xiaoling. Take it, your clothes. The weight is light when you start with it, and it also has a faint fragrance unique to luxury goods. Xiaoling had seen the scene in her previous life and was not flattered by this expensive gift. She politely said, Thank you. Li Lei lazily said, thank you, it's because I didn't think well and forgot to prepare. If you still need anything, just tell me, or just tell Sutang directly, and she will arrange it for you. Xiaoling said there was nothing missing and thanked Sutang. Sutang was well educated. After entering the house, he only spoke respectfully to his young master and did not even look at the guests in the room. It was only then, after hearing Xiaoling's thanks, that he raised his eyes to look at her and smiled politely at her. But for some reason, Xiaoling felt that her smile was cold and did not reach her eyes. It seems that this elegant and beautiful woman doesn't like her, Xiaoling secretly wondered in her heart when she had offended someone. Li Lei had already ordered, okay, Sutang, go back. Sutang did not leave immediately, but said to Li Lei, Master, yesterday you said you wanted to eat beef bones braised with tomatoes. I prepared the ingredients in your kitchen during the day. Can I make dinner for you now? As he said that, he looked at Xiaoling. He glanced at her and said, let's eat together, young lady. Her cooking skills were extremely good, hardly inferior to those of her young master, and no other woman could match them. Sutang has made up his mind to show off his skills. But Li Lei said, braised beef bones with tomatoes. Are you talking about the tomatoes in the refrigerator? They have been used up. As he spoke, he glared at Xiaoling gently. Xiaoling touched her nose and felt a little guilty. Well, she admitted that she had wasted a tomato, but it was just peeled and pitted, so he just threw it in the trash can. We have just made dinner and we have eaten it, Li Lei said to Sutang, you go and do your work, there is no need to come up. This time it's Sutang Zhen's turn. When will her young master cook dinner with other women? You know, although her young master is good at cooking, he is lazy and has not cooked much in the past few years. Sutang usually prepares dinner for him. Why did he make this exception today for a strange girl? And she couldn't help but take another look at Xiaoling, and her eyes fell on the shopping bag in Xiaoling's hand. Although the young master was a romantic man and had many beauties, he never stayed with female guests in this apartment. What happened today? He let a little girl live here? Thinking about it, Sutang's eyes felt even colder. Xiaoling's mind was still on the wasted tomato, and she didn't notice Sutang's hostility. Even if Sutang was unhappy in her heart, she still had to be elegant and considerate in front of Li Lei. She lowered her head and bowed slightly to Li Lei, saying in a gentle and quiet tone, then I will take my leave first. Speaking, he exited the apartment. Li Lei narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the direction Sutang was leaving. He turned to look at Xiaoling, who was in a daze and couldn't help but scolded, that's a woman. What? Xiaoling was confused. Li Lei was unhappy, you can't even cook, so what kind of woman do you think you are? Xiaoling. Hibernating it, and not rolling her eyes because he was the big boss, Xiaoling gritted her back molars and returned to the guest room, locked herself in the bathroom, and took a shower. The shower had sprinkled warm mist, gradually making her relax. There were too many things I encountered today, especially the thrilling encounter with Pei Zion, which made me exhausted physically and mentally. After she finished bathing, she took out a soft bathrobe from the clothes Sutang brought, put it on, fell into the large and fluffy feather quilt, closed her eyes and went to sleep. Her consciousness became hazy unknowingly, and an endless fog emerged, surrounding her. He was naked, and at some point he walked into the huge cage again. In the fog, the looming white fence was cold and gorgeous. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pull it open. He lowered his head, and there were pure gold chains on his ankles. End of this chapter. Rebirth of the Entertainment Circle, Return of the Queen. Author, Xia Weining. Chapter 40. Chapter 40. This milk is for pets. Xiaoling screamed and woke up from her dream, covered in cold sweat. She turned on all the lights with trembling hands, curled up in the corner of the bed, and hugged herself tightly. She didn't dare to close her eyes, and as soon as she closed her eyes, Pei Xian's face appeared in her mind. He was like appearing, beating her with a whip, and possessing her forcefully. And when he was in the hospital earlier, he looked at her. Her unpredictable eyes. Xiaoling, my beautiful butterfly, everything about you is mine. Li Lei, if you can protect him for a while, you may not be able to protect her for a lifetime. In a trance, the low and hoarse voice echoed in my ears again, lingering like the whisper of an abyss demon. She staggered out of bed, knocked over the water glass on the coffee table, and fumbled to turn on the record player in the corner of the room. She didn't know what song was playing, and the melodious melody spread. She had no time to think about it, so she forced herself to sing along with the melody, desperately focusing on the music and lyrics, staying away from the terrible scenes and memories in her dreams, not feeling or remembering. The consciousness is hazy, and scenes of horrific fragments and lyrics flash alternately, out of control. The door was opened. It was Li Lei. He heard her screams and the music from the record player burst in, and saw her curled up into a ball. Xingling, what's wrong with you? He leaned down and raised her pale face. She murmured fragmented lyrics in her mouth, looking at him with empty eyes, as if looking into the empty distance, fear reflected in her crystal eyes, as confused and helpless as a wounded cub. Looking at her in such a fragile state, Li Lei frowned, feeling a dull pain deep in his heart. Xingling, you really think I'm a coolie? He murmured to himself and picked her up. She was very light and her body was trembling slightly as she curled up in his arms. She instinctively leaned against him and absorbed his chest. A hint of warmth. Li Lei carried her to the sofa in the living room and gently stroked her back with his hands, soothing her gently. He had just finished bathing and was wearing a silk bathrobe. His warm skin was pressed against her cold body, as if he wanted to convey vitality and courage to her. She didn't know how long it took, but she felt that the fragmented and terrifying scenes in her dream finally subsided, her consciousness gradually returned, and she found that she was being held in his chest in an extremely ambiguous posture, and his heartbeat was beating steadily, as if there was something there. This strange soothing power made her calm down unconsciously. Are you having a nightmare? He asked softly. She nodded, shook her head again, and looked at him warily. He looked at her expression like a vigilant little animal and felt a little funny. It's not shameful to have nightmares, what about you? Seeing that she was still wary and her back was slightly tense, he couldn't help but shake his head and let her go. Xiaoling looked at him with some confusion as he stood up and left. After a while, a blanket was pulled out from somewhere and covered with her. The soft touch fell on her skin, which was very comfortable. Her tense back slowly relaxed and she let out a long breath. Li Lei left again. The kitchen light came on, and then there was the sound of the refrigerator door opening and closing, and the sound of the stove igniting. He came back with a glass of hot milk and handed it to her. It will make you feel better after drinking it. She blinked. She didn't expect him to be so considerate, and she was almost flattered. You know, for a big boss like him, it's easy to give women a few luxuries, but it's rare to cook and warm milk with your own hands. But she didn't like drinking milk, so she shook her head and said weakly, I won't drink it. He raised his eyebrows, don't drink. Before he finished speaking, a leopard slowly walked out of the shadows in the depths of the living room. It was covered in gorgeous fur with rose markings. It walked elegantly and lazily, and came to the sofa like a king conquering the world. Xiaoling felt like her hair was going to explode. The distance was so close that she could even hear the beast's breathing. Mao, I'm not here for you. Li Lei rubbed Mao's head casually. The leopard looked longingly at the milk in his hand and whimpered, seeming a little aggrieved. Li Lei put the milk into Xiaoling's hand. You drink it, and I'll prepare a share for Mao. If you don't drink it? He smiled slightly, showing his white teeth. I'll feed Mao the milk myself. Xiaoling looked at the milk in her hand, then at mouth. and said weakly, "I'll drink it." Lilei smiled with satisfaction and asked Mao to leave. The kitchen light came on again, and Xiaoling drank the milk in small sips. She heard him talking to Mao while feeding him. Mao, okay, okay, I'm 7 years old and I'm still acting like a baby. Isn't that just stealing a little bit of your milk?" "What, steal?" Xiaoling looked at the milk in her hand, confused. Not long after, Lilei returned to her alone and saw that she had finished drinking the milk and was very satisfied. So Dafa comforted her kindly and said, "Don't be afraid. Mao won't stay in the living room after eating midnight snacks. He has his own special room." "But," Xiaoling asked cautiously, "did you steal this milk?" Lilei was startled and laughed. "Isn't it stolen?" he said. "I never drink this kind of thing. All the milk in the house is prepared for Mao and is exclusively for him." Xiaoling was speechless. The taste of this milk was very special. If she remembered correctly, it was a very good brand abroad. In her previous life, her sister Xiaoyu drank it for a while when she was seriously ill. This kind of milk has to be booked in advance, and there is a limited amount. Every year, people are robbed of the quota. How many people are scrambling with money to get something that they can't buy, but he actually uses it to feed their pets. "What are you thinking about?" he asked her. "Rich and willful," she said. He laughed again, looking very happy, and couldn't help teasing her, "If you follow me, you will still be rich and willful." Xiaoling rolled her eyes at him angrily, "No one can force me to do something I don't want to do." "Don't be so nervous, little beauty," Lilei smiled playfully, "when did I say I was going to force you? Do I seem to be such a pervert? I will wait, one day, you will be willing." He has always been a very patient hunter, especially when it comes to his favorite prey, and he doesn't mind playing a harmless game of chase. Xiaoling has deep doubts about the credibility of his words. She is no longer the naive and gullible person she was in her previous life. She knows that all promises are insignificant in the face of the huge disparity in power and status. However, he wagged his finger leisurely, "I have to remind you that you rejected me once and I saved you once, so you owe me twice in total. It only takes 3. Next time, you will encounter any trouble, but don't expect me to help you unconditionally." She heard what he meant. If she asked for help next time, she would have to trade her body. "That day will never come," she said coldly. He laughed and looked at the fragile and proud girl in front of him. "Really? Let's wait and see." End of this chapter.